Are we on? Hello everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Cabinet Portsmouth City Council. Shall we just go round the room so everybody knows who is here, because this is being filmed. There is no fire alarm expected, so if there is one, it's Real Meat by Queen Victoria. And if members of the public, Tim, are here to be filmed, we will get film at the back of your head. So let's go round everybody. So Christopher, do you want to start?
Chris Ward, Director of Finance. Paul Fielding, Assistant Director of Housing.
Pam Turton, Assistant Director of Transport.
Richard Lee, Regulatory Services Manager.
Peter Bell, City Solicitor.
Sharon Wildsmith, Democratic Services.
Gerald Van Jackson, Leader of the Council.
Rob Wood, Cabinet Member for Children and Families.
Tom Wood, Cabinet Member for Resources.
Susie Horton, Education.
Darren Sanders, Cabinet Member for Housing.
Lynn Stagg, Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation.
Matthew Williamson, Cabinet Member for Health, Wellbeing and Social Care.
Dave Ashmore, Cabinet Member for Environment and Climate Change.
Lee Hunt, I'm the Cabinet Member for Community Safety.
Colleagues, just for the record, shall we go round who else is here and why they're here? Fiona?
Jerry Brown.
Concerned local resident. Is that an accurate description, Jerry? Great Uncle Hugh?
Councillor Hugh Mason, Chair of the Planning Committee.
Hello, I'm Mark Webb. I'm representing the port today.
Mark Pembleton, Economic Growth Manager for the Economic Development and Regeneration Association.
Luke Scott, Conservative Committee.
Thank you.
Tim Sherman-Chase, local resident.
Thank you. Also concerned local resident. Thanks, Tim. Okay, folks, let's run through the agenda. We have one apology for absence from Councillor Steve Pitt, who is on leave. Anything else, Joe?
Chief Executive David Williams also sends his apology.
Okay. Hugely important. Declarations of interest. Anybody got anything to be interested in? No. Record of previous decisions. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 meetings. Colleagues, are you happy with those minutes?
Yeah.
Thank you. Response to the Housing and Social Care Scrutiny Panel review on provision of temporary accommodation. Luke, you're here. Would you like to come up? And initially, thank you very much indeed. I thought it was a really useful report.
Thank you. I'm not going to say that much on this one really, because I think it largely stands for itself. The salience of the topic is pretty obvious, and you know, for the last, I don't know, about 2 years I believe, there has been pressure on temporary accommodation. We picked it up. It started to happen quite late when we were in administration. It wasn't true in 2014. It sort of came upon us a bit later than that, and so it's been interesting to have a bit of a delve and to get a bit greater understanding of some of the drivers behind this. And certainly there were some things that came out of this which I suspected were true but didn't know, and now do. The most obvious of which is that if you look at the placements within council accommodation, something it shows in the report, something like half of those are people who are already in council housing, moving for one reason or another, bigger family, different needs, something like that, and the other half are effectively there because they are either statutorily homeless or at risk of becoming statutorily homeless. And if you're not in that situation, then you know, realistically you're not going to be housed. I thought that was quite an interesting thing to see. I thought it was also quite revealing about what some of the drivers of homelessness are. And again, I mean, you know, you pick up a lot of this nationally, but the same things are confirmed here too. So you see issues to do with terminations of tenancies, of private sector tenancies, and so forth. We had a look into this. The recommendations are, I mean, in some ways they're pretty obvious, really. I mean, you could have almost come up with a recommendation without doing the scrutiny, but in actual fact, they did fit together. And it really is just about doing what is within what is realistically possible to increase the supply of properties available, which is very easy to say and much harder to actually do. But those are the recommendations that came out with it. I'm happy to take any questions, otherwise happy to propose this to you.
Thanks, Luke, and can you pass on our thanks to everybody who's worked on this? Much appreciated. Darren.
Thank you, Gerald, and thank you to Luke and everyone else for their hard work on this. Although, as you say, some of it is sometimes a statement of bleeding obvious. It does need to be stated. I think one of the things we did when we took over was to say, look, here is a problem. Please let us go away and understand what the problems are. And I think one of the things we have to, the first thing is to state is that several of the people we're talking about do not sleep rough. The council has no legal duty to handle people who sleep rough. I regard this as immoral, and we do handle people who sleep rough. And I think that's very good, and we need to improve the service, but we also need to understand what the key drivers are. And so I want to go through the recommendations in turn, if I may. The first is to say that basically the amount of period a council property is empty for goes down. I agree, indeed, on day 2 of resuming power, I asked officers to do precisely that. I'm delighted they've got some ideas on that which have gone through the systems thinking intervention, and I believe that will generate significant savings. I mean, when we took over, on average, a council property was empty for 8 weeks. I mean, that is not acceptable. And it's one of the things that is being looked at and I believe will be reduced significantly to help. The second is around vacant public sector buildings. I know, Luke, this is something that Leader has been particularly keen on, and I've had chats with the Chief Executive about this to try and make sure that happens. That's not purely to handle people who are statutorily homeless, but also to handle people who sleep rough as well. Because I think everybody has to work together, partly because of the size of the city. In number 3, it says the council continues to make block bookings for emergency accommodation hotels and Bs to reduce costs and uncertainty. It said partly agreed because we don't really want to do that, but we know we might have to. And as it says, and as the report says, it's being used where appropriate. But we also need to find other ranges of available accommodation. That's why we've put in at least the first tranche of £1 million to buy homes for the homeless. Several people who are in this category. We're also buying back properties at the moment. We're also looking at the best way forward. So it might have to be a hotel, it might have to be a B&B sometimes, but that really is not acceptable because often it doesn't have things like kitchens that people want. But you're right to raise it and we will keep it in our locker. The fourth revolves around housing associations. And I think the officers are right to flag up that some of the housing associations have similar problems to council properties, in fact. And although it is something that we will carry on working, what we're also looking to do is we've put in place a strategy to buy back empty private properties as well. There are about 780 empty private properties in the city. That is not on. And that's why we've put in place a strategy to start to buy those back, provided it washes its face financially. And the final one is again to develop social and affordable housing. And again, this is absolutely correct. And it's not just Southsea Community Centre or Doyle Avenue. After we resumed control, we managed to work with the owners of Kingston Prison to make sure that about 180 of the units they're supplying there are affordable. That was not the case when a planning permission was offered. We've also been able to ensure that part of the Moneyfields development, if it happens, has affordable housing in it. And that's not the government's definition of affordable housing. It has to include housing people can genuinely afford. So I mean, Gerald, apologies for sort of replying in some detail to all this, but I think the scrutiny report deserves more than just sound bites because it's a very good and a very thorough report, and I look forward to it being implemented over a period of time. And again, my thanks to Luke and to the rest of the team for putting it forward. Thank you, Gerald.
Thanks. Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, very good report. I was really quite surprised to find that the biggest cause was the end of private rented tenancy. And this is something I know that's happening right across the country. And is there anything we can do? Because I know we have people we know who've lost the tenancy of their homes and then they can't afford to rent the next one. And I mean, it's families, it's not just individuals. And I don't know, it's just a question. And the other thing I was surprised at, that there weren't any people who've left the forces. I expected to see quite a lot of veterans in there. And then over the page in there, where it says a significant number of people who approach the housing service and present as homeless have complex mental health or substance misuse issues. Now, are we doing anything about Hope into Action? Because that is really good. I mean, how far is that spreading out, though? And secondly, what about the voluntary sector? Can they come in? Because a lot of these people who've got drug or alcohol issues, before they can go into regular accommodation, they need to address those, or mental health issues. They need to have those addressed and worked with. And I know that the health service is overstretched, but could the voluntary sector help at all?
Okay. I shall do quick answers, and then against my better judgment, I may ask Darren to speak again. Lynn, this is entirely your responsibility. Yeah, thank you. So, Lynn, strangely, when I've got people who approach me who are homeless, who are ex-forces in some way, or people who approach me who are homeless, the first thing I will ask is if they have a forces connection. Because often if people have got a forces connection, it's easier to get people housed than if they don't. So Hague homes particularly are very good and can often help really quite quickly. In terms of Hope into Action, we're working very closely with them, so Joe Bennett and the Lord Mayor's personal moral guidance, the Lord Mayor's chaplain, Tracy Ansell, are working together because she runs Hope into Action to try to make sure that the houses that we're buying work for them and to build on their capacity. I think Darren may be able to help more in terms of the voluntary sector for people with drug and alcohol misuse. And you're right, just putting people into housing with no support doesn't work because we find 50% of people are back out on the streets. I met one woman. She lived in Portsmouth for 9 years, had a good job, well, reasonable job, but stable for 7 years, and she'd had 17 flats. Because every 6 months, landlords get people to move. And how on earth are you meant to bring up a family? Okay, Daz.
Thank you, Joe. That's absolutely right, and that's one of the reasons why I've launched a review into actually making the private rented sector easier and safer. Because you're right, too many people move from one place to the other, and that people are happy to stay on the waiting list when rather than go private because they're scared of what will happen. That has to change. We're a limited island. I'm not going to comment on the forces side because Gerald's done it very well. We are already working, Paul, with Hope into Action on at least one property and probably more because their model works very, very well with the sort of provision we have. The figures, I've also asked officers to go away and actually dig further into those figures that Luke and the team have highlighted on the report and actually find out the real reasons why. At the moment, it's coming back by saying, well, the landlord wants to move back or the landlord wants to sell a property. What I don't know yet is whether that's real or whether that's a landlord just finding a way of getting people out of the property. I suspect it's going to be both. But we need to do more of that work. We're also talking to the Assistant Police and Crime Commissioner who wants to work with us in terms of dealing with survivors of domestic abuse and people released from prison. We need to have a dedicated pathway for that. As far as mental health services are concerned, you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things that Gerald and everyone else and the rest of the administration is very keen to do is to make sure there's a more coherent service available and actually better work. I want to praise the work of Nick Moore and the CCG in terms of starting that process, but there's lots more to do. But thank you for raising that. Lynn.
Okay. Colleagues, are you happy to accept the report and note the things I've suggested as in the recommendations? Okay, thanks very much indeed. Thanks, Luke. Don't run away. Tim, do you want to come and join us? So we've got air quality now, and what I thought we'd do is ask Pam if she'd very kindly introduce this, and then come to Tim and Luke, and then go around from there. So Pam, thank you very much, and Richard, hello.
Thank you. So this report provides an update on the work that's been progressed to date on the production of Portsmouth's Air Quality Local Plan. As you'll be aware, Portsmouth was issued with a ministerial direction in October 2018 to develop an air quality local plan to demonstrate how we can deliver compliance with legal limits for nitrogen dioxide in the shortest possible time. Since that date, we have been in a period of co-development with JACU, the Joint Air Quality Unit, to determine ways in which we could achieve compliance in the shortest possible time, benchmarked against a clean air zone of sufficient class to achieve compliance. Our modelling suggests that the benchmark option would therefore be a Class C, CAZ, so essentially charging non-compliant buses, coaches, taxis, private hire, as well as heavy and light goods vehicles, both for internal and external trips on Portsea Island. Our modelling has also suggested that a Class B CAZ, so essentially charging non-compliant buses, coaches, taxis, private hire vehicles and heavy goods vehicles, i.e. not light goods vehicles, in combination with a range of non-charging measures, will achieve compliance as quickly as a Class C CAZ, but with reduced impact on residents and businesses within the city. This report therefore recommends that this approach is endorsed for the next stage of development, ready for the submission of the plan in accordance with the JACU deadline of the 31st of October 2019.
Thank you very much indeed. So, who would like to go first? Is it age over beauty, or? Tim, do you want to go first? You look as if you have things prepared, and thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, thank you. It is unlikely that a Class B clean air zone will bring air pollution within legal limits in a short time, including additional non-charging measures. Cars are the main source of pollution, which is ignored under this CAS plan, so it misses the most obvious opportunity to address the problem. No other cities have seen big changes in NO2 after introducing a Class B CAS. Portsmouth also has a track record of over-optimistic air quality predictions. For example, in the 2010 plan, PCC states that they will reach legal levels by 2012 to 2016. This may be due to unrealistic assumptions, bad traffic data, or a mistake in the analysis. Why should we trust the latest modelling when the older predictions were very wrong? The proposed city centre road scheme will also ruin any chance of legal compliance. Is the traffic from this and other future developments included in the air quality model? And will the council commit to stopping any plan that violates air quality limits? Given the experience of similar cities, CAS Class D should be modelled and planned, as well as the do-nothing option and an option of Class D CAS with a ban on older diesel vehicles. This is the only way we can be reasonably certain to meet legal requirements and provides a stepping stone towards PCC's commitment to get to net zero carbon by 2030. There is also the issue of the legality of the Council's plans. The Council report states that a balance needs to be struck between achieving compliance with legal requirements to reduce harm to people's health and the impact that such measures could have on the local economy and residents' livelihoods, end quote. The High Court rejected that argument, saying that cost is not to be considered in planning, only efficacy is to be considered. Quote, I reject any suggestion that the state can have any regard to the cost in fixing a target date for compliance or in determining the route by which the compliance can be achieved, where one route produces a result quicker than the other. In those respects, the determining of the consideration has to be the efficacy of the measure in question and not their cost, end quote. So the current air quality plans should be opposed until they meet legal standards. Portsmouth also lacks a safe cycling and pedestrian network, such as seen in Rotterdam and other cities. It is not clear that PCC is prioritising active travel as a means to tackle their priority. For instance, Portsmouth Cycle Forum recently objected to the proposed seafront cycle route, saying it was not safe. The proposed city centre road scheme also overly focuses on private vehicles, only does the bare minimum for active transport. PCC plans only seems to extend to 2022. While achieving short-term legal air pollution levels is important, it is also necessary to put in place a long-term plan for continuous improvement for air quality. The council modelling seems to ignore the possibility of improvements to public transport, which should be a key part of any air quality strategy, to provide people with a practical alternative to car use. A credible air quality plan would have long-term ambitious measures, as well as help for residents and businesses to adapt. But as I haven't seen the latest modelling, and I'll be very interested to see the report in October.
Thanks. Luke.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I just want to make a perhaps somewhat cheeky political point coming out of the last item, the housing item, just in response to something that was said, which is, we're talking there about the end of private sector tenancies. What would end all private sector tenancies in the city is if Comrade Corbyn gets his way, forcing through his rights to buy, which will result in all private sector tenants receiving the end of their tenancies at once as the whole private sector rental market disappears. Onto the item. I don't want to see a charging zone. It would be damaging for business. It would hit the city centre. It would undermine the Isle of Wight ferry, and it would make Portsmouth as a whole a less attractive place for business. I also note that of the local authorities that have had to go through this process so far, only Birmingham has had a Band D charging zone. Other cities are in other places, and Southampton appears to have backed away from their original proposal. What I don't know, of course, is what conversations you've been having with central government, what pressure has been applied, and what options are open to you. And so it's pretty difficult sitting here to comment on some of this without knowing that information. I mean, I've been involved in free briefings or free discussions, if you like, with officers, sometimes with other members about this on the air quality committee, and also in discussion with Tristan Samuels at one point as well. And you can see how this thing is moving. I've been told three different things, and the first time it was looking pretty bad. By 2021 there was going to be widespread exceedances. Then the next time it was okay. They've got another year for 2022, and there was only a couple of places that were over. Then it was looking worse again, and so it's moving around a lot. Now, I'm a little perplexed by this, because I would have thought the government would have had a model, it would settle on it, and it may be right or it may be wrong, but the numbers would be the numbers. And we don't seem to be in this situation, so I find that quite concerning. Now, I'm not trying to pin that onto you. I suspect, and I don't know, I'd like to hope this comes out in a discussion, that you kind of not your decision what modelling is used. I'd like to have an answer to that, though, because if it is, then you need to be more consistent in what you're doing. You can't try to meet a target which is just going up and down week to week, and no one knows what it is. The report that you've got, so you're talking there about a Band C charge if you don't have any other measures, and then you're saying, well, it'll be Band B with other measures. Now, there's a long list of other measures, of course, in the outline strategic case. And maybe it's just me not understanding this correctly, what I didn't pick out in the report is a list of the other measures you're hoping to receive government funding for. Now, that might be, you might just by that mean what's in the appendix. Maybe you're hoping to get funding for all of those. I don't know, maybe it's just me not understanding it correctly, but I'd like some clarity on that, because obviously you require a certain effect from these non-charging measures, so we need to know what these non-charging measures are. The other thing which I found quite interesting from the outline strategic case, and actually quite worrying, where you've got some costings, was just the vast cost of having any sort of scheme. 10 to 20 million pounds, just in order to be able to monitor vehicles and to send out bills. Well, there's only 3 roads in and out of Portsmouth, in effect. On the face of it, the geography makes it a simple problem. So I can only assume that this is to have monitoring all over the city, so not for vehicles which remain on Portsea Island for their entire journey get caught up. But isn't that a massive amount of money to spend? It's just, on the face of it, there ought to be a better solution than that. Spending 10 to 20 million pounds on the charging system is a very large amount of money, when 10 to 20 million pounds might actually take you some way to actually solving the problem rather than just measuring it. You also have in the report, it talks about 110 cameras, which was quite interesting. That's an awful lot. I didn't know they were out there. And in the appendix, this is one of the reasons I'd like to understand the context of the appendix. Is the appendix just a list of possible things, or is this your plan? Because if it is, then it refers to increasing parking charges in the city centre in item A1, and in item A3 it refers to increasing the charging for residents parking in order to discourage vehicle ownership. Are these policies you are putting forward as part of this proposal? And if that isn't your policies you're putting forward, what are you putting forward as your non-charging measures? Because as far as I can make out, it's supposed to be that list, or it's just not stated in the report. And I think all of us, in terms of the public and members of the council, need to know that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Luke. Just to start this off, I think it's sensible for us to be aware of where we are in this, and this is not something that the council is choosing to do. this is something that the government is choosing to impose on us, and it's having to work through their methodology, which is at times deeply unhelpful. But this is a government plan which the government are forcing onto Portsmouth, and I'm sure, Luke, as a spokesman for the government, as they're your lot, that you'll be able to to support and justify them.
This is EU red tape.
No. So this is entirely imposed by government, and not at either the wish nor will of the City Council. And we will work within what the government forces us to do. But if we end up with a clean air zone, this will be at the decision of the government. Full stop. Nobody else. So I'm sure, Fiona, the slightly inaccurate stuff in the news, yes, about this will be corrected, as this is not a council plan. Full stop. This is a government-imposed plan. So we will always refer to it as a government-imposed plan, because it is always a government-imposed plan, which is imposed by the government. I think there are some bits and pieces of things. Joe, copies of Bob Seeley's letter that you've got to hand round to everybody. Okay, could you phone Rhiannon, because she said there'd be copies for everybody, unless she's given them to me. She has, sorry. Folks, my apologies, sorry. As you've referred to him, Luke, here's a letter from Bob Seeley, the MP on the Isle of Wight, saying that all traffic going to the Isle of Wight should be exempted from this, on the basis that the island is different. But as it's his government who are imposing this, and he's a member of it, I've given him the job of correcting this, because it's the government who are imposing it, and he's a member of it. So Bob Seeley's written to say the island is different. Please, can we not have any charging on anybody going to or from the island? And actually, he's got a point. If all it does is it means that somebody in a lorry who's trying to get to London, starting in Ryde, drives across the Isle of Wight to Yarmouth to pick up the ferry to go to Lymington, drives through the New Forest, and then that route, that'll produce more air pollution than if they come through Portsmouth. And yet they are likely to be charged in this government-imposed scheme by going through Portsmouth, but not if they go through the New Forest and across the island. And that's clearly barking. But it's his government. So I think the other bit that really worries me is the effect on the retail sector. We know that almost all the parking around in our main retail areas is private. Off-street stuff is almost all private. We have no control over that at all. But the government is trying to keep high streets alive. But this government-imposed plan is likely to drive people to not shop in Portsmouth, but shop at Hedge End and out-of-town retail parks where they can only get to by going down motorways and driving further. So it is really badly thought through by government, and they'll have lots of consequences which are unintended. So we have to go through this plan, and I'll look forward to seeing what comes out in October. We wrote in March, I think, to the government to ask about lots of different things, and so far, Luke, there has been a deafening silence. If you're able to get any sense out of the government, it'll be very welcome. But we wrote and said, can we have investment in bus transport and cycling to the same level of investment as happens in London? And we've heard nothing back. It's not a big ask, just to the same level as London. We wrote to them to say, look, to encourage people to leave their cars at home, can we give people, everybody in Portsmouth, a free bus pass to use the buses? And we've heard nothing. A deafening silence. So government seem to be very keen on imposing things. They're not very keen on coming up with any solutions. We will have to struggle through with this, but we need to try to make sure that it is effective at protecting people's health, but also that it doesn't discriminate against people. And I have a real worry for those people who are the poorest in our city, for whom a car is an essential for work, for whom it will become now too expensive to go to work, because they're the people who can least afford to change their cars. And we will drive people out of work and onto benefits just because the government aren't thinking in a joined-up manner. So I think there are lots of big problems with this, but unfortunately this is a government-imposed scheme with a government-imposed methodology which we have to do in their way, even though we know it'll be ineffective and we could do it much better if they didn't impose things in this way. So, with that neutral introduction, I'm presuming, Mr. Ashmore, as lead on environment, that you will want to speak?
Yes. Now?
Now.
Thank you.
Right. Have I given you enough introduction?
I was about to say, I've not really got much left to say, apart from just in case anyone didn't know this is being imposed by the government. But there is a serious point. You raised it in March, because you both, first of all, thanks for the deputation, both of you both make valid points about, it needs to be a bit more than, window dressing. It needs to have things on it. But we did, as the leader said, in March, we did write to the government. We did have these list of asks specifically about air quality, of which you mentioned there, subsidising bus travel, for example, and, helping us to get, no funding for it, the cycling infrastructure. Because a lot of people, when they've come to me, we had the survey about clean air zone, but a lot of people have been saying to me, we either need a clean air zone, I know you have, Tim, and other people have been supportive of it, but they said it has to be done in line with improving public transport or improving alternative methods of transport away from cars, and that is an important part on this, and we need to bring that out more. But like you say, we did write to the government. I think Michael Gove's the Environment Secretary. I don't know, I haven't checked Twitter, I don't know if he still is a Tory MP or been kicked out yet, I don't know. But that was in March, so we've done our bit, we've done our ask for the government, so and it's benchmarked, as you say, by the Clean Air Zone. With clean air zones, the thing is, once you've hit compliance, that could be taken away. We can't rely on clean air zones, no matter what class it is, because it won't be long lasting. We need to put things in place. We need to start putting other things in place which are going to help, air quality around here. That's going to be longer lasting for the future. That's not just going to be, let's hit compliance and, sit back. It needs to be something for the longer term there, for the future generations, for our children. And the leader's right. We can't afford to make it just a tax on less well-off people, and it also can't afford to be something that shifts pollution around the city. It needs to be something that gets people, I'm going to say the word that you don't like, the modal shift, which means a change of attitude, change of behaviour, change of thinking about how we approach, private car ownership. So that will, so more people do cycle, more people do take public transport, more people do like to walk. Obviously, that the ball's in our court. We've got to do something to help that infrastructure. But that's, as I say, we've got to do it alongside what the government are asked to do with the clean air zone charges. So I think we've struck up that balance here between not punishing less well-off people, between helping people here, but also, putting something in place, putting things in there that's going to make it for the long term, for the future. And I think we've come up, and things can be added to it. This is going to be, comes back to us as a strategic outline case. So things, we can push for more things. We can be more ambitious with it. But I think we've struck the balance pretty well with this.
Okay. Lynn?
Thank you. I think it's important to say it's the clean air zone bit that is imposed by the government. But what we're actually doing is something that we want to do, we need to do. And in transport, for example, I mean, transport causes 50% or thereabouts of the air pollution. And there is something we can do about it. Getting people to get out of their cars is very difficult because cars are welded to their bodies here in Portsmouth, and I'm sure some people go to bed with their cars because they can't leave them at all. That is a difficult thing. But the thing is that if you get people out of cars, you've got to have an alternative mode of transport. And we are working hard with the bus companies to improve the services we have already. But it's a catch-22 situation. People don't use certain parts of the bus services, the journeys. Therefore, the bus companies cut those services. Therefore, few people use the buses because they can't get to where they're going. So it's so we've got to somehow or other stop that. And we've talked to the bus companies about various ways and means of doing that. How successful will it be, I don't know. But in transport itself, we're working now on a fully integrated transport strategy. And that is, it's well, you mentioned, Tim, 2 years. Yes, that is the point that we've got to get certain things done by. But we're looking at a 2-year, 5-year and 10-year plan. And having various bits, they're all in those sectors, following our priorities for the city, to addressing those. Cycling is very important, that is in it. And the cycle, it's what's it called, LCWIP, the cycling and walking strategy is in the, to be finalised within that 2-year period, and then for the next sort of 2 to 5 years time actually being put in. And it's difficult because you can't just put in, I'd love to see complete cycle routes, continuous. Gerald knows, he's been cycling, and he came in one day and said, do you know, I was cycling along such and such bit, and it ran out. And I said, well, yes, that is the problem. So, but to do that, we've got to get parking off some of the main roads. Now, you try telling people, residents, I have to have my car, I have to park it there. And you're talking about retailers, and they say that they'll lose custom, etc. They did it in Amsterdam, they did it in Copenhagen, and not a problem. They took one street out at a time, and there was uproar about it. It was never going to work. But within a year, every street around was asking for it to be done. So it can be done, but we've got to win. I used to have an advisor when I was teaching. We used to talk about the WHAM factor, winning hearts and minds. And we've got to actually try and convince people. And it's so difficult. We had an exhibition about residence parking zone in Cobham, 2 of them. And this couple came up to me and said, we've got 4 cars. What are we supposed to do? So I said, have you got off-road parking? No. And I said, so where do you park? Well, on the road. So I said, so you're taking up 3 other people's parking spaces? And so her husband said, so you're telling me I can only have 1 car? I said, no, what I'm telling you is, if you haven't got off-road parking, you've only got room for 1 car. He said, you're taking away my civil liberties. And I said, but there are people dying in the city because there are too many vehicles. Now averages, I'm beginning to sound like a stuck record, I know, but there are on average 1.37 cars per household in Portsmouth. You've only got room, it's a city of terrace houses, you've only got room for 1 car outside most houses. If you're lucky and you own a big house, you might have room for more than that, but you've still got more cars than there are spaces. It's not just the parking, it's the road congestion. Road congestion is what is producing huge amounts of air pollution, plus it's clogging up the roads, it's affecting the economy, because if you can't get your deliveries done by a certain time, it's just not going to work. So we've got to get people to understand it's got to be done. This is going, DEFRA aside and the CAZ aside, it's got to be done. And it's not unique to Portsmouth. This is true of every major city in the country. There are too many vehicles because we've all got used to having cars. I am so old that when I was growing up, I played in the street all the time because we had 1 car and 1 van in the street. That was it. Boom, boom. And that was true of most streets. Now, you've got more vehicles and commercial vehicles as well than you have got spaces. So we are working on it, and it's hard going. Part of it comes from us, part of it comes from getting grants, and both the Transport Department and the Environment Department are putting in bids for money to help make these things happen. But we need the public to support us as well, because it's out there that the modal change, you may not like it, but that it's got to happen. So we've got to get people to come on our side. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Matt and Lee.
Thank you, Gerald. This is a very difficult situation we find ourselves in, but I think it would be a mistake to think that CAZs are a solution that is in any way considered and thought through. Unfortunately, it's not. CAZs are a sledgehammer that the government uses because they have no real understanding of what needs to change in terms of improving air pollution. They just see it as charging people. Now, charging people might have some effects, but it's very much something that affects everyone, and most severely affects poorer people in the city, because they do not get any relief from it whatsoever. And if you're a wealthy person with a very large car, which is non-compliant, you get charged exactly the same as if you're a poor person with a very old car, because that's all you can afford to run, and perhaps you have to do much more running around the city for your job or whatever it might be. So that's problem number one with the CAZ, which is why I think having a B class plus mitigations as well is really useful. I completely echo what Gerald said about having asked for lots of these things and we have no reply from government. If they're serious about this, why don't they do this? But then this is what government does. Central government does this to local government. It gives you crumbs. It endlessly gives you pots of money you can apply for, and you don't know whether you're going to get it, so planning ahead is very difficult. And then when you do get it, you find out that it's not necessarily what you want, or it's got strings attached or whatever. What needs to happen from central government is, in the same way as they are imposing what we have to do on the City Council, they should impose a load of money on us, so we can actually fund these kind of things. Non strings attached funding for active travel, sustainable travel, walking, cycling, buses, whatever it might be. That's what should be happening from central government, not diktats coming down saying you have to do this because by our own laws, and I'm afraid, this thing about it's the EU's fault, this is what our governments in this country have been doing for 40 years when it's their fault. It's their fault because they cannot get their own house in order, so they use the EU as a scapegoat, which is why we find ourselves in the mess that we are in. So I commend this report because I think it has the right balance of having the minimal impact on especially poorer people in the city who would otherwise find themselves in very difficult situations, just trying to live their day-to-day lives. Not anything about, as Lynn said, some people are very wedded to their cars, but it would particularly be difficult for, and let's be honest, we've been talking about temporary accommodation, whatever. A lot of people in the city, when they've been in temporary accommodation and they get rehoused, often, for example, when they're in a position where they have to then take up housing wherever it is in the city, and for their job, they might have to have a car, or it might be because they've got too many children at different schools. They're often away from where those amenities, where their job is, etc. So this all fits in together, but with all these other measures. But we must have commitment we must be able to get things from the government to help us with this, because if they're imposing something, we really need to do things. The work that's going on with LC Whip, all the other work that we're doing in terms of the health impacts and improved health for people in the city by activity, both walking, cycling, whatever, that's all really important. But we have to respond to this in a way that is going to minimise impact and make it so that this city is not diminished by this happening, and actually that you use what opportunities you have, even though if you were designing a strategy to tackle this, you wouldn't do it with a sledgehammer, which is a CAZ. In this way, it would be part of a much wider package and be much more nuanced.
Okay, Lee?
Yeah, Council, I agree with the things that my colleagues have said, and Councillor Winnington's absolutely right, it is a sledgehammer. But the CAZ is symptomatic of the problem, isn't it? But you know, too much. We rightly focus on cars, you're dead right, they are polluting, but eventually, and before much longer, hopefully in my lifetime, we'll find that these petrol guzzling cars will disappear, we will have more sustainable transport, and what cars there are will be driven by electricity or hydrogen or whatever. And there's reason to be optimistic, isn't there? There really is. And of course, too often people come here and focus on one issue, but we have to look at the wider approach that the Council is taking. And let's just remind ourselves, if we may, Leader, that Portsmouth being crowned Council of the Year for energy efficiency, and particularly around looking at people in poor homes. The City Council boasts the largest in-house energy team, not in the South East region, but across the United Kingdom. We put in over 400 solar panel systems in Portsmouth, amounting to something like 20,000 solar panels. And only at the last meeting didn't we agree that we were going to reduce the amount of energy consumed by our street lights, not reduce the light, but reduce the amount of energy that lights consume by putting in LEDs. And then you only have to look at the energy saving initiatives that have been put in at the international port. I mean, all these things save huge amounts of money, and they all reduce our carbon. And then you've got to look at what Councillor Horton has done along the end of the table there, where the schools under her stewardship have won the National Recognition for Solar Schools programme. Again, you know, this is all being done here in Portsmouth. You know, the council gets knocked left, right and centre sometimes, but it's doing a very good job. And you only have to go online to see the huge amount of work that's being done by officers across the City Council and by partners. And officers from this council are now going out to places like, I believe, Sussex, and helping them to install all of their solar panel programmes too. So a huge amount of work is being done here. A model, and Portsmouth is being held up as a good model for reducing carbon and going out to places like West Sussex, where 80 West Sussex schools are being supported by Portsmouth officers installing these projects. Mr. Seeley from the Isle of Wight, I mean, how two-faced can you be? I wonder, I don't know if he has or hasn't, but has he bothered to ask a question in the House of Commons about his particular concern for the Isle of Wight? I'm concerned for the Isle of Wight too, but he wants an exemption for people travelling through Portsmouth. He could have asked a question tomorrow, couldn't he, of the Prime Minister? Oh, but no, because they prorogued government, they shut government down. These sort of important issues ought to be raised in the Houses of Parliament, but this government, which is imposing this clean air zone on Portsmouth, which is symptomatic of failing to have public policy around cars and pollution for so many years, and now they're proroguing Parliament because they can't get what they want. You know, I hope people will look at everything that is being done, and I hope that in future people will just vote them out of office.
Well, okay. Thank you, Lee. I'm sure, absolutely. Pam, I have 6 changes that I'm going to suggest from pages 59 and 60. And I'll go from the back, from page 60 upwards. So the first is, I would like to suggest that we ask the Director of Public Health to write to to parents of every child in the Portsmouth school to tell them about the health benefits of kids walking to school. And as I understand it, kids walking to school are less exposed to air pollution than if they're driven to school. So if we can encourage more parents to allow their kids to walk to school or cycle to school, actually it's better for the kids. But I think there are lots of parents who think they're protecting their kids by driving them. And it would be useful, that would be my first suggestion. The second suggestion I'd have is that I think we need to be having fast charging points at all taxi ranks and at places where private hire vehicles gather, because the aqua cars and the other, the citywide cars, etc., they tend to gather in particular places that aren't taxi ranks. But if we're going to encourage them to shift to having electric vehicles, you need to have places where they can charge them quickly. And that, I haven't seen that, and I hope that we might be able to put that in. The third thing is that we ask that government give the same level of financial support to Portsmouth to encourage cycling, walking and bus transport at the same level of subsidy as happens in London. Not more than London, but just a level playing field with London. And fourthly, that we ask for investment from the government so that everybody can have a bus pass, free bus pass in Portsmouth, to encourage that modal shift to people to leave their cars at home. Actually leaving their car at home and getting onto a bus may not be as good as getting rid of the car and only using the bus, but actually it's a long way down that route. When I talk to people who are cyclists, most of them say to me, actually we have a car as well. And it's encouraging people to actually to leave the car at home and not use it, but to use something else, which is where parking comes in, because actually if we're going to encourage people to leave their car at home, they need someone to leave their car. My last two concerns are about measures A1 and A2, which are about car parking charges in the city centre, both on and off-road, and reducing them. My understanding in the city centre is that the council, in terms of car parks, is a very small player. Almost all of it is private. If you look at the Tricorn site, it's private. If you look at the multi-storey car park at Creswell Street, it's private. If you look at the multi-storey car park by Cascades, it's private. The only ones that the council owns are the ones that are normally empty. So increasing car parking charges on car parks that are already empty doesn't seem to me sensible. I just think I think we could keep it in, but say this will be completely ineffectual on the basis that the council doesn't own the car parks. And reducing the number of car parking spaces available in the city council, again, it's completely, we need to say that would be completely ineffectual because almost all of them are private. So I think it's foolish to try to put in things that we know won't work because they're completely outside the council's control. So I would suggest deleting A1 and A2, or saying these will be completely ineffective because the council doesn't control most of the car parking in the city centre.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Does that include all the on-street parking as well?
Well, but if you look at the proportion...
No, I just want to know, yes or no?
My view is, I think it's, if you're looking at parking in the city centre, it's all one. If you make on-street car parking so expensive that they choose the cheaper option of the private car parking space, what have you achieved? But I think you need to think about it in the whole, in the round, and it seems to me that bit is ill thought out. So, with those changes, are people happy with the report to go forward? Yep, okay, and we look forward to a detailed report. Pam, when? Because we know government have changed the rule. Luke, if you could take this up again as you're responsible for the government. Government have changed the rules on how things have got to be calculated, but they haven't changed the rules on when they want the answer back. So we have to have a separate meeting to be able to, I'm very sorry, colleagues, we're going to have another meeting to be able to hear the report, because they've changed the rules, we won't be able to hit the time frame we were hoping to do so before. So we'll be in contact in terms of trying to find a time. But everybody's very welcome to come to that and to see the detailed stuff. And the title will be the Government Imposed CAZ. Okay? All right, folks, thanks very much indeed. Next one will be longer. Treasury Management, Chris.
You stole my thunder, Leader. I was going to say I was hoping to get the same amount of enthusiasm for this report as we'd had for the previous two. Anyhow, this is your... Do you want to introduce, Leader?
No. This is dull but worthy, so I'll leave it to you.
This is your annual report on the Council's Treasury Management activities. It is a requirement of us, and it is best practice to do so. So it's part of the overall governance regime. So in 2018-19, we have a report here which most of the conclusions are actually in Appendix B, but what Appendix B really tells you is that we have a range of indicators. Some of those indicators are actually limits that we shouldn't really breach and are encompassed within the Council's Treasury Management Strategy, which is a Council-approved document, and some are estimates. Of all of those that are limits, within the year, the Council remained within those limits. So it's remained within the limits that are set out within the Council strategy. There's two indicators in there that are estimates. One of those the Council remained within, the other one the Council marginally exceeded. But in overall terms, in terms of those limits, the Council remained within its borrowing limits. It remained within what's called its maturity limits. That really means for your borrowings and investments that you're never overly exposed at any one time to the market. So you've got a relatively even profile of when your borrowings come up for replacement or when your investments come up for receipt. And finally, the other area is how exposed are we to either fixed interest rate borrowings and investments and variable interest rate borrowings and investments, and you need to strike a balance between those two things, and the Council remained within the limits that it set itself in March of, would have been 2018.
Okay.
Happy to take any questions.
Rob?
Just really on council borrowing, just wanted to check on a couple of things. Obviously, the council has borrowed at certain rates at certain times in the past, etc., to get favourable rates based on forecasts that the rates would not be so favourable as time passed. Has that proven to be true or false? So what I'm trying to ascertain is in our strategy of borrowing at the right rate at the right time, with the fact that, you know, we're a couple of months having to pay interest for a couple of months, has that proved to be correct?
I don't think anybody's got a perfect crystal ball. And in scenarios where you've got uncertainty, the best that you can do is hedge your position. So the process that the Council follows generally has been the Council have tended to borrow when rates hit something close to historic lows. It may happen that a month later we may find ourselves with another historic low, but you don't necessarily borrow all of your requirement in one tranche. So we borrow in tranches, and we continue to borrow when we generally hit relatively historic lows. If you said if we absolutely achieved the maximum low rate of interest that we could have, no, we haven't, but I don't think there's anybody in the country that would ever do that either, because they haven't got a perfect crystal ball. But generally speaking, we've secured long-term loans, generally between 45 and 50 years, at rates more recently between 2.2 and 2.4% interest.
So just on a follow-on question, so you're basically saying swings and rounders, but it's pretty good rate that we borrowed at. Given some important decisions are about to be made, and given possible lending requirements, have you considered that we may want to hedge our bets on ongoing lending requirements in the short term to cover anything that may happen in almost the short term?
The council still has a borrowing requirement, which it hasn't yet taken, and we expect there to still be a number of events, probably related to Brexit, that create a degree of uncertainty which actually push gilts down as people or as investors flood into very safe investments because of the uncertainty associated with Brexit. So the answer is yes, we have, and we continue to watch what rates are doing.
All right, colleagues, are you happy with this? Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure they will be overjoyed. Great. Economic Development and Regen Strategy, Mark, hello.
Hello.
Anything you would like to add to the report that we might not have noticed?
No, not really. It's as it's written, yeah.
A microphone, otherwise, Mark, your words will not be saved for posterity. There we are, you're now live.
Yeah, it's just basically, Leader, that the purpose was just to seek approval from Cabinet and Council for the adoption of the new Portsmouth Economic Development and Regeneration Strategy 2019-36, to note the consultation survey results and the summary feedback from our stakeholder focus groups, and to note the Council's role and benefits of delivering a successful economic development and regeneration strategy. And just the background there is that there were really three big reasons why we need to do this right now. One was we hadn't had one since 2010, so we were definitely overdue one. And with the new administration, it was very, very good timing to do it. Second one was that we had the National Industrial Strategy back in November, so again the Council wanted to align with that. We have the opportunity to influence the Solent LEP and the Local Industrial Strategy, which will have hopefully funding attached to it in the future with the Local Growth Fund and UK Share Prosperity Fund. So we need to be able to influence that. And then lastly, the National Planning Policy Framework, which the Council is doing a local plan on. We definitely need an economic development and regeneration strategy to underpin that, to show that that's a viable plan and that it can deliver growth for the city. And the other thing is, I guess, the business community out there has been asking for some time that they wanted a very clear strategy for Portsmouth, because this is very much a city strategy. It's not a council strategy. It's what the business community out there and general and employees and students and all the other communities of the city really wanted something that they get behind, which is a long-term strategy for growth for the city. So I'll leave it there.
Okay.
Leader, thanks.
Thank you very much. I think it's enormously important that if we are able to pull families out of poverty by having more economic activity in the city, better paid jobs, then that has real effects upon children throughout their lives and families, so that people are able to live longer lives, healthier lives, more productive lives, and there can be almost nothing more important for the council to do. We are a city where people do live in poverty, and if we can, through work, through economic activity, help those families and those individuals to have jobs and then better paid jobs, that's a really good thing to be able to make sure that people are able to improve their lives. It is, in my view, an appalling indictment that in the first half of the 21st century, in one of the richest countries in the world, people who live in the city centre die on average 10 years earlier than if they live in Drayton and Farlington, just 3 miles away. And we have a responsibility for doing what we can to try to make sure that we pull everybody up so that everybody has a better chance to have a successful, healthy and prosperous life. So, colleagues, are you happy with this as it is? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Mark, for all your work. George, hello.
Hello.
You are coming to wax lyrical on the issue of the port.
Something like that, yes.
Excellent. Mark is here to correct you, as required. You want to come and join us, Mark? But George, leap in.
Yeah, I'm just coming to present the report and happy to take any questions or
Would you like to go through highlights, things that you think are important for us to know?
Well, the recommendations, ideally, which I'd like you to consider.
Which is the first is to say thank you to you.
Well, that's come from the director, so yeah, I'll take that.
Okay, Mark, anything you need to add in terms of this?
Good afternoon, everyone. Not particularly. The port wanted to express thanks to the panel for the review that was undertaken at the port, and the port would like to recommend that the panel's recommendations are approved.
Okay. So personally, I think the investment in the port has been really important for the city and for the City Council. It was a really sensible long-term investment that the City Council across all political parties has chosen to invest in over the years very sensibly, and we continue to do it. The new management team seem to be doing a very successful job across the whole of the port, and that's good to see that not only are Brittany Ferries prepared to enter into yet another long-term deal with the City Council, but in the commercial ferry port that we've been able to get Geest to return to the city, and so that now we are importing over 30 million bananas a week. Jerry is eating most of them. 30 million bananas a week is a good stat for a Trivial Pursuit question, I'm sure. But I think it's really important, and actually I think that having a cross-panel scrutiny group to look through it builds on that cross-party support which has always existed for the port, except in one point where I understand the decision to sell the port was only stopped by one vote. I think it was a joint Lib Dem Labour councillors got together to outvote the Conservatives by one vote when they chose to get rid of it, but even they have come to their senses since that point. Matthew.
Thank you, Leader, and thanks very much for the report. I was actually, myself and Councillor Hunt were actually on the committee right back at the beginning, just about 2 years ago when this started. So for various reasons, it's taken a very long time to get to this stage. But it's a really good report, and it has been worth the wait. But I'm particularly happy with recommendations 4 and 6. Because I had some part in that, I think, at that time, so especially 6, because we had quite a long conversation about how our port is used by a lot of people in the area, but it isn't necessarily, especially people coming in and going out, both sides, as well known or as making use of the resources in the whole area as possible. So the recommendation 6 about using attracting tourists to Port Support and working with our partners in the local area about everything they can do, rather than, as I was told right at the beginning, about where do people who come into. So this came for, actually this was from the American sailors when they come in. So this is a slightly off point, but it's just the way that our tourism works. When American sailors come into Portsmouth on their ships, they either go to London or Stonehenge. And it's ridiculous when you think of all the things we have in our area on their doorstep, like the most complete Roman fort in the whole of northern Europe is next door, and yet all these people who come into the port, or visitors, they go to London and they go to Stonehenge, so they're really missing out. So it's
we retain about a third of them when people come in on ships, but you're right, 2/3 do disappear.
Yeah, and it is the point of working with our partners across the southern area that yes, they might come in. You're quite right, Gerald, but then you're missing out with the wider economy, where of course a lot of our residents work. So I really commend the report, and I'm happy to have had a small part in it.
Good. Rob?
It's a great report, and it's a cause for celebration in where the direction the port is going, because previously we've had a lot of reports about the port, and we've had worries about it, and it's good to see there's some strategic direction going on. A couple of points I just want to make that have been included in it. A recommendation too about the air quality. One of the things I said, it's really important that there is an opportunity for the port, if it really pushes air quality and is known that people will use it because it is going to deliver good air quality and we need to make sure we push that, not just say it, if that makes sense to you. In a way, that follows on to recommendation 3. From my window, from what I can see out my window, I can see a lot of more cruise ships coming through to the port, and that's a great thing to do, because clearly I think it must be that time of wherever we are, a lot more people are taking cruises now. It's gone back into fashion to some extent, so it's really worth doing. And finally, just a couple of points. Point 8 about UAMs. I will say that has levelled off, so that information going back and forth and being reported to the portfolio is very vital, because we have actually levelled off the number of unaccompanied minors coming into that port. So that bit of intelligence is very important. Finally, recommendation 9, Brexit. I really think the port need to be on their uppers on this one, because obviously we don't know how that's going to affect it. So I'm very happy that we're looking at all eventualities there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Lee?
Yeah, including the port, and just hopping back to the previous report, I mean, we've done a lot around carbon reduction around the port, as the manager will know, and just one report on the internet from Greenport, and it says that Portsmouth International Port's terminal building is already carbon neutral. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure that's a report there, but there's a lot of good work goes across the council, from the port right through down to the city south. And we're always, all councillors are always considering how to reduce carbon.
Yeah. And the aim is not just for the terminal itself to be carbon neutral, but the whole of the port operation together. We're 2/3 the way there, and there's still some more, but actually in comparison with many other businesses, to be 2/3 carbon neutral is amazing. So we've done a great job. There's lots more to go. Colleagues, you happy with that as it is? Thank you very much. Thank you, George. Much appreciated. Colleagues, there are 2 information items that I'm not expecting there to be debate, but they are information items that are being brought to us, and they are the one Oxford Economic Study on the port, and also the one on Victory Energy. Okay, colleagues, I think that is it. Thank you very much indeed for your time today. And that is it.